Great, I have 11 a.m. Good morning, good afternoon. I see that we have one person that's logged in that has a .au ending to their email. So I think they're Australian. I don't know if they're calling in from Australia or not, but welcome all. Thank you for joining the 5th webcast in our series for Ocean Exchange. For those of you that are new to us, and I see quite a number who have logged in who are new, we are a nonprofit. We have one mission, and that's to help advance the adoption of innovative solutions from startups. For you tech geeks, I would say that our real sweet spot are TRL 6 through 9. That means these have a working prototype. You're going to meet one of them today. We are in year 10, and we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary in 2021, which is coming up very, very soon. Our mission to advance the adoption of these solutions has been a great one in those 10 years, and we have a lot of success stories. And you're going to hear from Jolt today, and they won our 2018 Wallenius Wilhelmsen Orcelle Award. We do focus on the ocean, sustainable coastal systems, and the decarbonization of shipping is of particular interest because of our sponsors. We are privately funded, and we execute our mission by giving away $210,000 of non-dilutive awards, and we've created an ecosystem to help these startups. On that first slide, Alice, if you can go back to the first one, you'll see our major sponsors. You can go to oceanexchange.org and see our entire board and all of our sponsors, and we could not do this without them. So welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Dane Dunstan, who is our MC and moderates our webcast. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Great to see you. Thank you for being here. This is a really fun one, and it's one that's very important to the work that I do. Currently working on with the Port of Los Angeles and with Wallenius Wilhelmsen on some thinking about what happens when ships come into port and how we can reduce the emissions while they're in port. I think everybody on the call knows what Moore's law is. That's the law that says the amount of computing power in a chip will double about every 2 years. But not many people know what Kumi's law is. And Kumi's law says that the amount of data that can get produced, the amount of electricity that's needed for that growth is cut in half every 2 years. So it's pretty exciting that we can have these devices that we carry around with us that get more and more and more powerful every year, but don't need any breakthroughs in batteries. And that's really been a great thing to have. But if you're trying to power a city, if you're trying to power a ship that's coming into port and you want to have it be zero emissions and run on batteries while it's in the port, then we need some breakthroughs. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is that kind of breakthrough. The other thing I want to talk about is batteries. We are all very excited that we'd love to have our own Tesla and get a fancy electric car and all of that. And it's great that they're out there and reducing emissions as they drive around. But the secret is that the amount of energy needed to produce the batteries to run your Tesla is pretty huge. And what it means is that fleet of electric cars that's running around has a pretty big bow wave of CO2 out in front of it. And so that's something that we need to work with, and we really do need a breakthrough in battery production. Not only the amount of power that they can produce for the size and get the weight down, but the amount of power that it takes to create them and the efficiency of them and where they are. So we're going to hear some examples about that today, and particularly when Tom talks, they've got something happening there that's pretty exciting. So let me turn over to Curtis. Why don't you fill us in on the state of grid scale energy these days?
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much, Dane. I greatly appreciate the introduction. If you'd give me my first slide, please, Allie, I'd greatly appreciate it. Again, good morning. I'm Curtis Zimmermann from BASF, the government liaison. I spent a bit of time engaging with governmental agencies, and one of them is the Department of Energy quite often. Just from geographical context, I'm coming to you today from Cold Spring, New York, in the beautiful Hudson Valley across from West Point Military Academy. So it's a beautiful day here today. It's really my pleasure to provide you today a brief vignette on energy storage, and most importantly, tee up our plenary speaker today from Jolt Energy. I thought today I would start out with a wide net on energy storage types, outline the importance of energy storage, and then really filter down through some examples that I think we're most familiar with. And as I filter down through some of these examples, I think we're all going to realize how broad the field of energy storage is. It's quite large. Next slide, please. I think it's great to start out with the question, what is energy storage? Because that means different things to every different person. And I think we can ask, is it fossil fuel? Is it electrical, electromagnetic, such as capacitors or superconducting magnetic energy storage? Is it mechanical, like flywheel energy storage or pump storage hydroelectricity? Could be thermal storage in the way of molten salt storage or phase change materials. Some will think it's biological. There's a lot of energy tied up in starch. And closer to where we're going in our discussion today is electrochemical. A lot of us think about rechargeable batteries, flow batteries, and things like that. But of course, the answer to the question, what is energy storage? It's all the above for different applications. Next slide, please. I think we have to also ask a couple questions as we go along and try to think about energy storage. Why is it so important? Well, for distributed renewable energy to become ubiquitous, we need to store it for when we need it. It's great that we can create that energy from sun or from wind, but if we can't store it, we have to use it right away or it's wasted. And it's been said for decades, energy storage is really the Achilles heel of renewable energy. So again, if we want to see decentralized, distributed, renewable energy throughout the US and the world, we have to improve on our energy storage capabilities. Next slide, please. I want to take a minute to really point out how important it is, particularly to the Department of Energy. How important is energy storage to the Department of Energy? Well, it's certainly very important. In the last 3 years, the Department of Energy has spent well over $1.2 billion on energy storage technologies. And related to that, in July of this year, they released their big energy storage grand challenge, which is a roadmap. It's a roadmap and it's a comprehensive program to accelerate the development, commercialization, and utilization of next generation energy storage technologies. And what the DOE is going to do with this is they're going to leverage all the different offices under their umbrella, whether it's the Office of Science, Office of Electricity, Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy, ARPA-E, which is the Advanced Research Project Agency Energy. And they're going to leverage all these offices because these different offices have different areas of expertise. They have their energy storage triangle, which you can see in the slide, which really groups together different energy storage technologies, of which I mentioned a number of them. The Energy Storage Grand Challenge really has 5 tracks. And those 5 tracks really cover everything from fundamental basic research all the way up through workforce development, which is very important. So it has tracks on technology development, manufacturing, technology transition, policy, very important policy, incentives for adoption of energy storage technologies, and then of course, workforce development. We have to have people that can work in this whole area of energy storage and battery technology. And all these offices then need to come together with this roadmap and integrate together so we can bring the best energy storage technologies into our grid and infrastructure, which is not a simple issue. Now, when you talk about the DOE and Energy Storage Challenge, understand that that really trickles down also to other states. So in my home state of New York, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority also has an energy storage roadmap that helps guide us to develop and bring on more renewable energy as we move forward. It's of no surprise to any of us that energy storage is also of great importance to the European Union. And likewise, earlier this year, the European Union released a very big report around energy storage and how it is critical for the safety and security of electricity in Europe. So it's very, very important. Next slide, please. Well, I've been talking about energy storage and the different examples of it, but I think it's really good to get a visual. You know, what do some of these look like? Some of us have different ideas. Well, if we're talking about fossil fuel, that's pretty easy. There's a lot of energy tied up in coal, natural gas, oil. We're all familiar with that. There's some pretty neat advanced stuff from electromagnetic perspective, superconducting magnetic energy storage, and then some of the routine things like capacitors that we're all familiar with. If we think of mechanical storage, you know, we can think of flywheels, you know, that convert electric energy into kinetic energy, and then back into electric energy when we have peak demand for that electricity and we need it. You know, energy can also be stored in water, pumped to a much higher elevation using pumped storage methods. This is very common in pumped storage. Hydro is very common in Europe as well. And then let's not forget, some people think, well, energy storage, that's thermal energy storage. You're talking about phase change materials, which are typically substances which release or absorb sufficient energy at some phase transition to provide useful heating or cooling. And generally that transition is going to be between a solid and a liquid. You can think of a wax as a material, good phase change material. And really the biggest potential market for that is in the heating and cooling of buildings. Next slide, please. Well, finally now we're starting to approach our topic of today, and that's electrochemical energy storage, and specifically flow cell batteries. So you can see in the slide on the bottom right, we have some of those big square batteries that can go into your computers. Above that, we have a huge flow cell energy storage for distributed renewable energy. The bottom left, you have coin cells, which are used in different areas. And then the top, you can see the standard batteries that go in flashlights that we're very familiar with, and the conformation and the different structures of that circular battery. Now, it's kind of interesting. You'll hear from those skilled in the art using very technical descriptions to describe the battery type, like the jelly roll formulation. And for the person having skill in the art, this actually has very detailed technical meaning, the jelly roll formulation. For many of us, we prefer the meaning to be the culinary delight instead, and I like to think of it as a metabolic energy source. Nevertheless, I think we can agree there's energy storage sources available from the jelly roll, whether it's the battery or the culinary delight. Next slide, please. You know, I've mentioned numerous types of energy storage, and I think this is a great little chart. But I do want to remind everyone to keep in mind, batteries are not a source of energy. They are a way to store energy. We need to keep that in mind. And when we think about energy storage, you know, we must recognize that we're talking about an incredible broad horizon of materials, technology, and as the graph shows, power ratings and discharge times, which will really dictate the application. So your coin cell energy storage for your watch is going to have different properties than the battery for your electric vehicle versus the large grid scale energy storage for renewables. Also, as a chemist, I can't help but get excited. If you think about the chemistry selection alone in all these technologies, it's really mind-boggling. Chemistry is all over the place. But for our discussion today, let's just take a very small slice, which is still rather big, and focus on flow batteries. Next slide, please. Well, the beginning of flow batteries. You know, when we talk about flow batteries, I don't want people to think this is something brand new that just recently happened. Now, there are incredible new technologies that are coming on stream, and we're going to hear about that shortly. But the flow batteries can go back to early patents in the 60s from NASA, which patented what was known as a reduction oxidation flow cell. And reduction oxidation has been shortened to redox. And that really means some chemistry is oxidized, another one is reduced, you get electrons flowing, and that's how we get energy. There are a lot of developments over the years in terms of different chemistries. You can see that on the slide, whether it's zinc halide base, bromine, cerium, vanadium, a lot of other different materials. Some of you may well be aware of the well-known, you know, sodium sulfur batteries for grid scale energy storage. And there are a range of capabilities that these flow cells have to bring in terms of their application, whether it's electrochemical potential, energy density, power density, toxicity, and cost. And associated with that are a lot of challenges. Cost is a very big issue, but also toxicity and also recyclability. And I don't mean recyclability in terms of recycling plastics. I mean, how many times can that flow cell be used before it's, quote, worn out? What are some of the next generation flow batteries? There's been some interesting news out of the University of Southern California that they claim to have demonstrated an all iron redox flow system from iron oxide rust, essentially. That's why we have a bunch of rusty nails on the slide there. If that's the case, there's a lot of rusty metal out there. Rust never sleeps, so it's readily available and economically viable. But what does the future hold? Well, I'm not really sure, but I'm looking forward to hearing from Jolt Energy because I think they can give us insights to the future of flow cell batteries. So with that in mind, I thank you for your time, and I'd like to hand it back to you, Dane, to introduce our special speaker today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Curtis, and hang with us, and we'll have some questions for Tom in a minute. I first met Tom in 2018 when he came to Ocean Exchange, and we had several times to talk. He's doing some amazing stuff, which is why he won the Orcelle Award that year, and where that ties into our interest in shipping and how we can clean up shipping and help ships use fewer or emit fewer carbon, let me say this in another way, make them cleaner when they're in port. Thanks. So Tom, tell us about what you're doing and what you think the future of flow cell batteries is.
Hey, Dane, thanks for the introduction. It's really great to see you and talk to you again. And Curtis, that was a fantastic presentation describing the general landscape of energy storage, why it's needed and what different types are available. So Jolt is founded, and we're looking to develop and commercialize organic batteries for energy storage applications. And Alice, if I could have the next slide. Our mission was really formed around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, specifically to foster the adoption of renewable energy, which is number 7, lower atmospheric CO2, 13, reduce ocean acidity, 14, and also to support off-grid activities. And I think that's become even more important in the days of COVID, and to provide portable energy for disaster relief and recovery efforts. And again, especially with climate change, that seems to be an increasingly important application. So if I can move on to the next slide, Alice. Thank you. One thing that people may not realize is that the cost of generating energy from renewable sources has dropped so dramatically that it has created a new paradigm. And in fact, now the cost to generate energy from renewables is actually below the cost of generating from coal, natural gas, or nuclear sources. So what's the problem? Why don't we do this for every new utility plant that's made? Next slide, please, Alice. Because as Curtis mentioned, energy from renewables requires storage. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. We can't flip a switch and expect renewable energy to be there all the time unless we have storage. And it's absolutely critical, and it has to be expensive. It's got to be reliable. It has to be extremely durable. And by that, I mean at least a 10-year lifetime, hopefully a 20-year lifetime. It's got to be safe, and we want it to be environmentally friendly. So next slide, please, Alice. Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about flow batteries, and Curtis introduced the concept. I'll give you a little bit more background. Flow batteries are different than the traditional battery that many of you are used to. When we think of batteries, typically we think about everything held in one nice convenient can or pouch. Everything is there, you just pop it in and you can go. Flow battery is a little bit different. It has fuel that is pumped through an electrochemical cell to convert chemical energy into electrical power. I usually describe this by analogy to your car, where you have fuel pumped from an external tank to an engine, internal combustion engine for your car. In this case, an electrochemical cell as an engine. And that engine converts chemical energy from the fuel to a different form of energy, mechanical energy for the car, electrical energy for the flow battery. And like your car, the power, the ability to accelerate, really, instantaneous power, is really defined by the size and characteristics of your engine. While the range, how far you can drive, is more defined by the size of your gas tank. What does that mean? It means that we've effectively separated energy from power. So if we design the electrochemical cell to provide necessary levels of electrical power at all time, then we can build the tanks as large as we need them to store as much energy as we need. So it's very scalable. 5 years down the road, if you'd like to double the amount of energy that you need to store, you just build bigger tanks. So it's very cost effective. So one key difference when doing the analogy with a car is that the spent fuel in your car is exhausted as waste gas. In this case, the spent fuel is recycled and we can recharge it by reversing the electrical power. So the most common type of flow battery is a vanadium flow battery. It uses different forms of vanadium as both fuel 1 and fuel 2, the negative fuel and the positive fuel. And they are pumped through the electrochemical cell. Electrical power is then harvested from conversion of the chemical energy. And the two fuels are kept separate by something called an ion exchange membrane. And it's just for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just a very fancy way of making sure that you can get ions across to balance charge so that your cell works, but your fuels don't intermix. Next slide, please. So Jolt took a slightly different approach. And I will say that there are multiple approaches to flow batteries, all have their pros and cons. We chose to look at an all organic flow battery. And we have a couple of twists on this. One, the all organic flow battery allows us to use a very environmentally friendly organic solvent rather than water. Why do we want to do that? Well, we can get at twice the voltage, maybe even 2.5 times the voltage out of using that system rather than an aqueous system. Another thing that we've done is we've replaced that vanadium electrolyte, which tends to be rather expensive. Many of you probably have not heard of vanadium, and there's a reason for that. It's a little on the scarce side. But we've replaced it by an organic compound, and that organic compound we can put in either a positive state or a negative state, so it can function as both the positive and the negative active material. The other significant thing that we were able to do by making those chemical changes is we can replace that ion exchange membrane, which typically costs $800 to $1,000 per square meter, with something that is just a porous piece of plastic sheet at $5 a square meter. So the net result is we can get 4 times the energy at 1/4 of the cost. Next slide, please, Alice. So, Millie let me put one picture of a chemical in there, so I appreciate that, but that's just for eye candy. Anyway, the features of the Jolt organic flow battery, we get at 2x the voltage of aqueous systems. We have very good solubility of our material, which means that we can cram a lot of active material into our fuel. We also have fast reaction, and this is something that is important for our system, and there are a number of systems others that are trying to commercialize that suffer from this. Their reactions aren't very fast, so it's hard to get the energy out quickly. In our case, we can get out very quickly, which gives us very high power. Another thing that we've done is that instead of transferring 1 electron at a time, we can do 2 at a time. And so that gives us another 2x in terms of energy and power. And of course, eliminating that membrane is important. We have a very wide operating temperature range. And our electrolyte, unlike a lot of the aqueous systems that are out there that require strongly acidic and corrosive electrolytes, we have a very non-toxic, non-corrosive material. And we designed the chemistry, we've created these new compounds, but we start with some very inexpensive starting materials to create them. So we keep our costs quite low. Next slide, please. So in terms of our current development, we have filed 4 patents. One of them has granted, a couple others are in process. This was done in my lab at Michigan State University. We have a very good relationship with Michigan State. We've negotiated a global exclusive license with them. We are beginning to scale up our active materials. We need to make a significant amount of materials so we can put them in some larger scale tests and get some real world data. I mentioned before that durability is a key issue. And how do you prove that something has a 10-year life short of waiting 10 years? And it is very, very challenging. You can do accelerated testing if you understand the system really well. If you have aluminum siding, accelerated testing for aluminum siding is well known, well documented, well accepted. For flow batteries, not so much. So we try to find ways to just pound on our device as hard as we can, as fast as we can, to accelerate our test efforts. So we were picked to participate in the Chain Reaction Innovations program at Argonne National Lab. As many of you probably know, Argonne is a fantastic place, particularly for battery research. So we've been excited to participate in that for about two years now and get some validation for our technology. We were also recently named to participate in the NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab Game Changer program. It's funded by Shell and powered by Shell. And we're just getting that project going, and I think it's going to bring fantastic benefits. Second phase of that project will be to incorporate a larger prototype device on the microgrid at NREL. Next slide, please. And that's what all I have for now. If you have any questions, please introduce them through chat. Thanks. I appreciate this.
Thank you so much. Tom, thanks. That was really, really great. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And then I'm going to ask Curtis to jump in. I see we have one question so far from Charles Christ. Aqueous systems are often considered more environmentally friendly than organic systems. Can you explain why your organic solvent is not a concern?
So and aqueous systems do have their advantages, both in cost of solvent and obviously in toxicity, except that most flow batteries using aqueous technology require very strong acids, very corrosive materials. Our organic solvent is incredibly environmentally benign. It's classed by the EPA in same class as corn husks. We feel pretty comfortable. It is a choice. I will say that we're also looking at aqueous systems, but with the improved energy density and power density that we can get with our system, and the fact that the electrolyte is environmentally very safe and benign, we think that could be a winner. Good question, though.
Curtis, any questions?
Sure, yes, Tom, I have a couple questions. One of them I'm curious about is, as you know, the largest market for energy storage in the coming decade, it's really going to be for electric vehicles. And my question is, how will, if at all, the performance demands of the EV market impact the performance demands and availability of energy storage systems for other uses, such as flow batteries?
So I get asked a question like that fairly often, which is, will flow batteries ever be used in electric vehicles? And I think that's unlikely because the energy density just doesn't merit it. But the development of electric vehicles has really benefited from advances in lithium-ion battery technology. And not only technology advances, but advances in cost reduction, economies of scale. As you know, Curtis, the price of lithium-ion cells has dropped drastically over the last 10, 15 years to levels below what anybody was predicting 15 years ago. I think lithium will remain the energy source of most desired for electric vehicles because of its high energy density. But for stationary applications, it has some drawbacks. One is in length of storage time. And typically, if you do the math on the economics, once you require about 4 hours of energy storage, now other technologies such as flow batteries become more economically viable. There's also safety concerns with lithium as well. We've all heard the stories, read the news articles about batteries blowing up and catching fire. And that's obviously an issue, and it's been largely resolved. However, for very massive installations for energy storage, it is a significant concern. And in South Korea, I know they've had a number of issues at energy storage facilities that have employed lithium-ion batteries.
Well, when you see the Tesla on fire, it gives you concern.
Yes, it does.
Particularly
Thank
with
you
your
very
Tesla.
much.
Hey, we've got a question from Roger Strevens. Apparently Roger knows some people who own ships, and he wants to know, what level of confidence, Tom, do you have of having a 3 megawatt system within 4 years?
That's a good question. Roger, it's good to hear from you again. You always ask tough questions. I think within 4 years, we can have a 3 megawatt system.
Okay, wow. All right, you heard it here. Angus Littlejohn has a question, and Tom, this is a question I actually asked last week because I got a little confused myself. Does this battery store the electricity created by wind or solar, or is it self-sufficient and provides independent power when the other sources are not available?
So the application for this from a wind or solar farm, when you have excess energy from wind and solar, you would use that to charge the battery. And then the battery can store energy for as long as you like. And when you need that at night, for example, or when the wind isn't blowing, now you can release that energy from the battery. So I hope that answered the question.
And I think so. It makes sense. Ann Carpenter has a couple of questions basically following on from Roger's. One is, can you discuss timeline and the impediments to commercialization?
Yeah, Ann, it's good to hear from you too. So the timeline is very, very challenging. We are slated to put a still relatively small prototype device on the microgrid at NREL. Excuse me. We are also looking for a somewhat larger installation. We've been talking with several utilities. The timeline is challenging. We need those pilot installations to get enough real world durability data and real world performance data to be confident and to be able to convince customers in the future that will be investing a lot of money, that we will be able to not only provide for their needs, but keep the system running at low cost for a long period of time. So I'm sorry I can't be too quantitative about the timeline. I do see a lot of hurdles, primarily with scaling up the chemistry. That requires significant investment. You know, fortunately, we have a good relationship with a scale-up facility at Michigan State University, so we can do it on a contract basis. It doesn't require capital investment. And then in scaling up the cells as well, you know, we've been working with relatively small multi-cell devices, but as we want to get to larger and larger power and energy storage, it's going to take probably a partnership with a manufacturing partner to do that.
So Tom, that leads into another question from Rogers. We've also got a question from Ratan Agarwal, so I'm going to jump to his in a second, but here's a follow-up from Roger. Is there a limitation on how far the electrolyte tanks can be from the electrochemical cell? And secondly, how heavy would a 20 megawatt hour system be?
Really good question. So I'd have to sit down and do the math on the weight of the 20 megawatt system. So maybe I can table that until a little bit later after the major discussion. As far as how far the tanks can be, there isn't really a hard and fast limitation. With appropriate choice of materials, there is no energy loss in transferring the fluid from tank to cell. There are some challenges in doing a multi-cell device in basically a multi-cell stack. Each cell in the stack tends to talk to each other, and there's a shunt current between cells because they're connected via a liquid electrolyte which conducts electricity. And so you have to figure out ways to handle that. We think we have that, but it's not necessarily a trivial exercise.
Ratan Agarwal wants to know what level of validation re the economics has been achieved.
Good question. So the first phase of the project with NREL, we've done our own internal techno-economic analysis, trying to understand cost models and ballpark our cost per kilowatt hour. We are doing a much more, well, I should say scientists at NREL are doing a much more detailed and advanced version of that as the first phase of our Game Changer project. So they are evaluating everything from performance perspectives, a lot of knobs to turn, including down to local energy costs and cost profiles for local energy to figure out the most cost-effective use cases and really understand the economics in great detail. So I think it's going to be fantastic.
Let me ask a question, this of my own. I know that efficiency is huge. You know, we put gas in our car, which is energy storage, but we only get about 30% of the efficiency of that gas out through our engine. I think lithium batteries are pretty high. Where does the Jolt battery come in? What's the efficiency?
So you're right, lithium batteries are very high. Flow batteries are not as high in general, in part because there are pumping losses, there are some losses associated with having to overcome kinetic requirements of the chemistry itself. So I don't want to divulge our numbers exactly. In commercial flow batteries, they range from 70% to maybe an optimistic 80%. We think that will be higher, but not as high as lithium. It's hard to beat lithium for that.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask this. We got two more questions. So let me toss one to you from Jesse Scott. He says, large-scale vanadium flow batteries have already been commercialized to a certain degree. Considering the engineering challenges with scale-up of the batteries, can the same type of hardware, the vanadium flow batteries, be used with these organic batteries?
Yeah, really good question, Jesse. So we are looking, we think that it will be almost a direct plug-in replacement of our chemistry into current vanadium systems. There's a couple things that we have to change, modify a little bit. So we're looking at the opportunity to do essentially drop-in replacement, but then we think it also offers the opportunity to re-engineer future vanadium systems to remove cost. For example, some of the materials they use to withstand their very highly acidic conditions, we don't need. They have secondary containment that's required for their acidic electrolyte. We can be much simpler with that. We don't need that. And of course, going to the porous separator rather than the ion exchange membrane.
Another question from Angus Littlejohn. Are there minimum size dimensions for the unit to be economically practical?
Very good question. And we think initially that because of not reaching full economy of scale, it will be the larger installations that we will need to target in order to provide an economic benefit. As we scale up the chemistry, as we improve manufacturing of the cells themselves, costs will come down for smaller units. We think that eventually even residential units will be possible.
Wow. We're going to take a couple of questions back after the program that are a little more technical. So if you're a techie, stay tuned for those after we finish. One really good question from Andrew Harrison, I think. Have you tested operability at any different climate zones or temperatures yet?
I missed that. Have we tested what?
Operability in different climate zones or temperatures?
Not very much yet. We do know that our solvent system, for example, is capable of operating at relatively high temperatures. Let's just throw out 120 F. We don't yet fully understand the profile of how that will affect durability, service life of the device. We know that it's capable of operating at low temperature as well, but we do lose a little bit of efficiency, primarily due to increased viscosity. So, good question.
Okay. I'm going to hand back to Curtis, see if you have any closing questions, and then I'm going to hand to Millie.
Thank you, Dane. I do have one last question. Are there any specific policies at the federal or state level that could really help move adoption of energy storage systems forward dramatically beyond the Energy Storage Grand Challenge and things like that?
Well, I do think that the Energy Storage Grand Challenge is extremely important, and you described how not only are they investigating technologies and how to move that forward, but they're doing things like trying to establish and improve the supply chain as well as train the workforce. So I think that that's really important. I think there's in the regulatory landscape is beyond my area of expertise, but I know that solar, for example, solar adoption really benefited from subsidies and favorable tax treatment. And I think the same could be true of any emerging technology. And I think there are some other more subtle ways in which utilities, for example, could be encouraged to adopt this. I mean, certainly well, not very subtle, but in California, required installation of solar onto residential housing is really going to stretch the utilities' capability to respond. They get, once they get over about 25% penetration, and you know this better than I do, Curtis, penetration of renewables onto the grid, things get a little unstable, things get variable, and energy storage needs to be a component of that. So I think there are ways that state and federal government can encourage adoption of energy storage technologies.
And maybe some regulatory barriers that could be reduced also, because when you integrate into the grid, that's not a trivial issue. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy involved that could possibly be eliminated. Thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Curtis.
Tom and Curtis, thank you so much. And Millie, over to you.
Thank you all. I love the questions and the active participation. And I want to hang on the line and ask Tom to really tell us just a little bit more about how solar or wind charge this battery for discharge later, kind of related to Angus's question, without telling us any secret sauce. So thank you, Dane. You can see Dane's information here. He works a lot in the leadership area. Many of you know Dane already, and he's a great guy, and I learned something new today, that he's a Formula One fan. So I learned something every time about Dane. Next slide, Alice. Put October 21st on your calendar. We are collaborating with the Marine Technology Society for our next webcast, and it's about cellular aquaculture. We'll be featuring blue Nalu. Next slide, Alice. And again, thanks to our sponsors, and anyone that wants to hang on and listen to a little bit more discussion, we'll keep the line open for another 5 or 8 minutes. Thank you all very much.
And Charles and Scott, you hang on. We'll get your next questions in just a second here. But thank you, everybody. Have a great day. And we've got 2 next month that are going to be very exciting to work with, two different webinars. It's going to be an exciting month. So, Tom, here's a question from Charles Christ. Are there any new issues with the use of organic materials in the flow system that might be a challenge for reliability and maintenance, and pump seals, et cetera?
Yes. Short answer is yes. We know a lot about our system now, so we have a good idea of materials compatibility, but there are a number of things that we know we have to stay away from for reliability concerns. So absolutely. And fortunately, the ones that we can use are not prohibitively expensive, but we do have to be careful.
And then Millie's question, just some more clarity on, so we got a solar farm, and it's plugged into the batteries, the coming from the batteries. How does it actually charge the flow battery?
So basically, think about running the pumps in reverse. So in my diagram, and I simplified it maybe too much, but I had 2 fuels coming in. They would go to a common reservoir of spent fuel. Now, if you run the pumps backwards and now apply a voltage, you recharge the batteries, refill the fuel tanks.
Alice, go back to, you're next to the last slide or third to the last slide of Tom.
Yeah, I think
And keep talking, Tom, while she's trying to do that.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I probably shouldn't have simplified the diagram that much. So you see the bottom arrow showing the directional flow of the fluid. Rather than returning to the same tank, you can bring them to a common spent fuel tank. So we've already exhausted the power. We basically turned X plus into X. We've turned X minus into X. We don't care if they mix now because they're the same thing. So that goes into an external spent fuel reservoir. And all we need to do is to reverse the pump direction. And instead of pulling out electrical power, we supply electrical power and we can recharge the battery. Does that make sense?
Even I understand it. It's perfect.
And I will emphasize that it's not a perpetual motion machine. We put in electrical power at some level. We get out once we start operating the cell during discharge, we get out less electrical power. So there are losses, as there are with any energy storage device.
Okay, one last question, and this is, I think, for both of you, Tom and Curtis, and we kind of covered this a few minutes ago. One of the slides highlighted the ESCG funding through the end of 2019. Is there a plan for additional funding? And if not, how does this affect development?
Well, certainly, as many of you know, there are a number of bills moving through the House right now that have to do with the Department of Energy. I need not remind everyone we're in an election cycle right now. So funding, long-term funding is always up in the air. We'll probably have continuing resolution. But one of the bills moving forward is really about reauthorization of the RPE, the Advanced Research Project Agency Energy, reauthorization of RPE, I think through 2025 or 2024. Remember, I think the House was 2025, the Senate was 2024. So that will go through at some point in time, and RPE will certainly be able to continue funding basic research on energy storage systems. And then the other areas of the Department of Energy, depending on their funding, will certainly continue. I think probably the best way to look at it is the fact that they've issued this energy storage grand challenge, which encompasses the entire umbrella of all the DOE offices. You know, they're committed to moving this forward. And they also know that this means energy security for the United States, you know, employment, meaningful employment, really great jobs. So they're going to move this forward at some point. I think we just need to get through the next month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah. Good luck. Everybody, thank you. This has been I think this is one of our best that we've had yet. It's been really fascinating. Tom and Curtis, you guys were great. Millie, anything else you want to say?
No, thanks. These guys were great. Thank you, Alice, who's behind the scenes. Thank you, Dane. October 21, November 18th. We will have 2 in November. Just a teaser on that, and I'll let you know more about that later. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure. Great day, everyone.